Good evening everyone, welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers update, the 5th of February 2013. It's been a while since our last update, the tropics are pretty quiet, but I thought it might be a good time to give you a bit of a heads up as to what might be coming in just around about a month's time. But we'll have a look at the build up before that. So let's take a look now at the satellite image of Australia. Righto folks, well in a word, the whole region of the tropics is just boring and dull. The only thing we're seeing is some pre-build-up sort of type conditions here in the Northern Territory where we're getting some really nice thunderstorm activity, but it's isolated at best. We're also seeing some good storm activity in the Kimberley region, but once again isolated at best at the moment. Look, this whole region will start to increase in activity over the next week or so. Also, the Queensland coast will start to see an increase in shower activity. Unfortunately, that increase will not head inland very far, especially in this central west region, which really needs a bit of rain. So that's not good news for them. Even the peninsula overall will start to see an increase in activity. So overall, the tropics are becoming more active, or will become more active over the next week. But look, it's nothing really compared to what the wet season should be. So we are having a very, very quiet wet season so far. So looking at the next 4 days, we're going to see that shower and storm activity over the northwestern top end, the northern parts of the Kimberley, a little bit of storm activity in the Gulf country, and some shower activity increasing along the Queensland coast, most likely in the favoured parts of the coast, the coastline that's aligned more north-south, where those southeasterly winds come in, hit these big mountain ranges and create a fair bit of shower activity right on that coastal fringe. Same thing around here in Mackay. And also a little bit of rain around southeast Queensland, but nothing to write home about. As I mentioned though, from the 9th of February to the 12th of February, we do start to see an increase in shower activity, not so much for the southeast corner of Queensland, but mostly the tropical, north tropical, and even parts of the peninsular coastlines over Queensland. We still see some more shower and storm, albeit isolated activity around the Gulf country. The southwestern Gulf not copping anything at all. The northeastern parts of the territory still remarkably dry for this time of year, but also an increase here in the northwestern parts of Australia as well. Now, this will be the focus area, particularly later on in the month when we start to see the MJO pushing across and into this region towards the end of February and into early March. This will be the focus of activity for tropical cyclone and tropical low development, anywhere sort of from just to the east of Darwin, really all the way through to Broome will be the focus of activity towards the end of the month. Look, overall for Queensland, it's going to be very dry February relative. Remember, you will cop some rain on the coast, that's to be expected, but relatively it will be very dry for pretty well the entire month of February. The news for the Northern Territory for the rest of the month isn't all that much better either. Okay, so basically the Bureau of Meteorology today issued their weekly outlook, and it's saying pretty well what we're saying. There's very little chance of any real meaningful rain over the next couple of weeks. We're going to see an east to southeasterly flow across the whole of the northern Australian continent, so we're not going to see a monsoon trough anytime soon, or at least an active monsoon trough anytime soon. The MJO is currently over Africa, and we're going to see perhaps a little bit of a weak low developing off the Northwest Cape, or near the Northwest Cape, but really there's not much chance of that actually happening and forming into a cyclone at that point in time. So where is the MJO? Now the MJO, I won't go into what it is, so if you want to learn more about what the MJO is, please Google it. There's a lot of good stuff online about what it is and how it affects our weather. But basically when the MJO starts to get into phase 4, phase 5, phase 6, Australia tends to get a lot more rain. And so at the moment it's in phase 1, which is around about Africa. And so because of that, Australia is in a suppressed region of convective activity and with an easterly wind anomaly, which means basically the monsoon trough is non-existent and we don't get much rain. So it's going to stay that way until the MJO starts to push into phase 3. When it gets to about phase 3, that's when we start to see more rain over the northwest parts of Australia. Now it has got a little bit of a move on, which is quite interesting in the last few days, and so we'll be monitoring that, because if it continues progressing that quickly, it might actually get to Australia a little bit earlier than we expect. We expect it to get to Australia right at the end of February, maybe at the start of March. But look, if it continues pushing at that rate, it may get here just that little bit earlier than we expect. Now, when this blue line or this MJO line gets into phase 3, 4, 5 and 6, that's when we start to see more chance of tropical cyclone development, particularly for WA when it's in phase 3 and 4, Northern Territory when it's late in phase 3, 4 and into 5, and then Queensland when it's in phase 5, 6 and even the start of 7, we see increased chances of cyclone development. So that's really what we're waiting for, is that MJO to make its way around. Hopefully the quicker the better, because then we'll start to see the tropics hot up a bit. Okay, so let's have a look at what I'm talking about. This is the progression of the MJO between the 1st of February and the 4th of March. This is what the model, the most accurate global model, suggests will happen. And so we track this green line, and this green line shows us how the MJO will go. And as we head towards the early part of March, we see that the MJO is now in phase 4. It's still a reasonably strong sort of pulse there, so it hasn't completely weakened, but it is weakening a little as it gets into Australia. So once we get towards the end of February and into early March, that's when we're going to start to see cyclone potential really ramp up, especially if it maintains some sort of intensity. And you can see here all these yellow lines are all the different models. And you can see a lot of the models continue to keep it fairly strong as it heads into Australia in phase 4 and phase 5. So as that happens, if it remains fairly strong, we saw what happened in the last MJO when it was strong. It started to get really strong around late phase 4, and you saw what happened in Queensland. Queensland got nailed, and the Gulf of Carpentaria got nailed by a tropical low and a tropical cyclone that just dumped copious amounts of rain. So if that sort of scenario eventuates again and the MJO stays pretty strong, we could expect a similar, I'm not talking about the actual weather system, but we can expect a similar increase in rainfall and storm activity. Now, interestingly, for Darwin and the Northern Territory, the MJO, as it got through to phase 4, which is good for those people, was really, really weak. And it only got strong once it got into the Queensland, north of Queensland region. So that was really the downfall for the Northern Territory's wet season, or the start of that wet season for them. Look, there's a lot of variability in the MJO, both in terms of how fast it moves. Like, you've got outliers here. Look at these yellow lines. By the 4th of March, they've got the MJO already over the Queensland region, whereas there's other outliers that keep the MJO still in the eastern Indian Ocean by the 3rd of March. So there's still a lot of 4th of March. There's still a lot of variability in the model guidance. But let's just say if this MJO holds that sort of intensity as expected by the modelling at the moment, we will see a fairly good increase in cyclone potential, and at the very least, at least a monsoon trough that might dump a fair bit of rain in early parts of March, maybe even the late part of February for the northwest, and then heading into mid-March, early to mid-March, for the Queensland coast and the peninsula. So just to go through and show you just how important the MJO is, this is the phase it's in now. This is phase 1, and you can see overall Northern Australia during phase 1 has a very dry period where we get these easterly winds and they push across the continent, and it really is more of a winter time pattern when the MJO is in phase 1. As we head towards MJO phase 2, we actually see the dry anomalies really strong over the northeastern parts of the territory and the far northern parts of the peninsula, and we see these easterly winds actually strengthen when the MJO is in phase 2. As it heads towards phase 3, we start to see these dry anomalies taper off, and so we start to see more average conditions, but we still have these easterly winds pushing across the northern part of the continent. As we go to phase 4, we don't have those easterly winds anymore. We start to get more average to slightly even above average conditions there in terms of rainfall as we head to phase 4. So phase 4 is really where we start to see an increase in rainfall over Australia, but phase 3 is where we start to see the potential for tropical cyclone development, particularly out here in the southeast Indian Ocean. Phase 4, we start to see that cyclone development potential head closer to Australia, and then phase 5, if we head over to phase 5, we start to see a huge increase in rainfall. We start to see the monsoon kick back in, and we start to see some really good cyclone potential in phase 5, particularly over the northwest and the north, and even in the Gulf is where we start to see the increasing cyclone potential. in phase 5, and then by phase 6 all of that cyclone potential starts to head even a little bit further east. Still remains pretty high in the northwest, and is getting high now in the Coral Sea. And you can see here the rainfall expectations. We see that an increase in rainfall over most of northern Queensland, Northern Territory, and even WA continues to see an increase in rain. So that's how the MJO phases affect rainfall patterns and wind patterns of Australia. Okay folks, so this week we're going to see a weak trough type feature here in the Coral Sea, or even maybe the slightest chance of a weak low out here in the Coral Sea. It'll push towards the west. It'll probably enhance a little bit of rain, especially in this north tropical coast, and we saw that in the rainfall predictions for the area. There's another chance at a bit of a low happening just inland in here, and there's another chance at a bit of a low happening inland in here towards the weekend, but really none of these have got any real potential, and neither does this, of actually forming into a proper low that's going to create, wind and rain and copious amounts of it. Look, we're going to see an increase in thunderstorm activity in this region, but overall, increase in showers here, but overall, look, no talk about cyclone potential in either of these systems, if they even happen at all. In the next week, we might have a very weak type low feature here off the northwest coast, or the far northern parts of the northwest coast in the Timor Sea or Southeast Indian Ocean. Once again, not expecting that to do anything, so nothing to be concerned about there in week 2. As I showed you though, that week we will start to see that increase in storm activity through here, but once again, it's nothing to write home about. It's actually quite weak for this time of year. And same thing for Queensland. We'll see that shower activity from that weak trough or low push onto the coast and then weaken out as that week progresses. So that's next week, folks. In the week between the 18th and the 24th of February, this is the area we're starting to watch a little more closely. Now, at this stage, the model guidance is not very specific on any area, and that's why we've drawn such a large yellow circle. But there is starting to be about a moderate potential there of perhaps a tropical low forming in that week somewhere in the northwest parts of Australia. So that is a week that we will start to watch it. By that stage, the MJO should be coming into the Southeast Indian Ocean, and so we should start to see, probably won't see too much of an increase in the monsoon as such over Australia yet, but we will start to see an increase in cyclone potential out here in the open ocean area. And this is the week that it all starts happening, folks. This is the week starting the 25th of February and ending the 3rd of March. So this is where we're going to start to see an increase in potential of a tropical low or cyclone, a real increase now in the northwest parts, possibly pushing towards the southwest or west-southwest, which is quite standard climatologically for them to do that initially, and then who knows after the initial movement. But there is a fair chance there of seeing a tropical low or cyclone in that week. There is also a fair chance of seeing a tropical low or cyclone, or at least the development of a good monsoon trough right around the top end parts of the territory and even the northwest parts of the Kimberley. So despite the fact that even here is a moderate chance of developing a low or cyclone, we also see a fairly high chance of the development of a monsoon trough. This stage probably not quite extending into Queensland in this week. Probably the Queensland part of the monsoon will extend in the week after, so the week starting the 4th of March. But remember that MJO has got to move on, and so we will be really monitoring that, because if that continues to scoot along, then these probabilities will be brought forward, and we'll see this area potential of a cyclone developing in this area a little bit further forward than we expected at the moment, which is towards the end of February, early March. Alright folks, well that's the next 4 weeks. Hopefully you can put up with the next couple of weeks of fairly dry conditions, and then hopefully we'll start to see an increase in rainfall, and then a sharp increase in rainfall at the start of March. Thanks for watching tonight. We'll keep you up to date next week on what's going on.